Hello. So thank you for joining us on a seminar that we're holding on maximising effectiveness at work and presence at home. I'm Kathryn Crosby, some of you may know, a senior and specialist legal and compliance who places general counsels, heads of legal and heads of compliance, as well as conducting team build-outs within the in-house industry. And I've asked Heidi, the gentle rebel coach, to share with us her wisdom and teachings on how we can be more effective at work and present at home. Heidi, do you want to let people know about you and what you do?
I do. Hello and welcome. We're hoping this discussion will be really, really powerful for you. We have lots to share. I'm Heidi Marke, the Gentle Rebel Coach, and I specialise in supporting highly driven, big-hearted professionals to create lives that work for them.
Thank you, Heidi. So when I suggested to Heidi that we collaborate on this topic of maximising effectiveness at work and presence at home, her question to me was, well, why are you doing this? And I thought it was obvious, but actually, when I reflected, there were quite a few reasons why I wanted to do this. One is I genuinely want to give something back to the legal community, and particularly those clients and candidates that I have worked with over many years from the beginning of my recruitment career, and who have been very loyal and supportive of me. But also for other reasons, I really think from my discussions with general counsels, heads of legal, and particularly senior lawyers at the moment, that this is a much needed discussion that they have actually told me they would welcome to listen to someone like yourself, Heidi, your thoughts on this, and how things can be improved for them in terms of how they're feeling. Because whilst the guys I work with are often top of their game, high performers within their companies, they're excelling, they are getting promoted, they're stepping up into new roles, and it's all very exciting. Underlying the conversations I'm having with many of them is this sense of tiredness and a bit of fatigue. And it's only actually after these discussions that I've been having with these lawyers that when they've actually also taken a step back and connected with themselves, that they realize that whilst on the face of it, they should be really happy because they are excelling and doing so well, something's still not quite right. And they could do even better if they took time out to look after themselves a bit more, to improve their performance. And I think it's a bit of a taboo still, which is a shame, but I think essentially to avoid what could become an inevitable burnout situation. And I think it's even more important with high-performing individuals who are incredibly ambitious and often impatient and demanding on themselves and their teams to realise that there's a very thin line between when you are able to self-reflect and be more rational and work out how you're feeling and what you can do to improve things for yourself, and that point where you kind of burnt out and you can't think straight enough to see where you're at and what needs to be done to help yourself.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me.
But I think from a commercial perspective, we are all here, we're high performers, we want to do well, in our business. General counsels, heads of legal, and lawyers in general want to perform well. It is that type A personality, it's in their blood. So as general counsels and heads of legal, particularly those who are responsible for managing legal teams, the power that they have to lead by example, I think, is really, really important. So if they can take away from this discussion some non-negotiables for themselves that they can practice within the day, within the week, that they can share with their team, and their team feels safe to also adopt their own non-negotiables and take responsibility for that, they'll be improving the effectiveness of their team and their performance even more than what it looks like at the moment. And therefore we know that increases retention levels, not just performance. And the brand of the General Counsel and their legal team. So actually, what I thought was a simple answer to that question of just wanting to give something back, I think there's many more layers to it. And I chose you, Heidi, because you came highly recommended from a general counsel that I work with over many years, but also because I think it is really interesting to have someone like yourself who does work with lawyers, but with, you know, high performing individuals in other industries, and bringing with you a different perspective and insight, which I think is going to be welcomed by the legal community.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm really, really excited to do this. And I love what you said about there's lots of layers, because there are lots of layers. And I'm interested to see how far we get in this discussion. And then if we don't feel like we've nailed it, as in, oh, there's more to discuss, we can maybe get together again, just to take the pressure off this conversation, and also not to overwhelm our audience, because you have such specialist knowledge. And I love your absolute big-hearted generosity of wanting to give back. I really respect that. You're the kind of person I work with. I actually, one of my non-negotiables is I only work with big-hearted, generous people now. And that was part of my own story of finding what matters to me and what my values are. So I just want to take the pressure off both of us, not overwhelm our audience, and know that, as you've just pointed out beautifully, this is actually a really big discussion, which is super exciting, because we're bringing a wealth of knowledge and generosity together, but also to make sure that by the end of this, we have one clear step that people can take away, that's easy, that's not like, oh, I need to do all of these millions of things. So yeah, I just like to set that as an intention.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think even by engaging with this discussion, you know, listening to this, they have taken some time for themselves. You know, it's just the smallest things. I think sometimes the feedback I get from the lawyers I work with is I just don't have time, and it feels like it's an impossible task to improve their lives for themselves. But actually it's just, and I think you'll be talking about this, Heidi, in our discussion, it's just actually little changes or tweaks that can be made in someone's day that can make such a difference.
Yeah, I actually specialize in what's the smallest thing and easiest thing you can do, because I work with people who are incredibly busy and pressured, and that's also, I've always had that interest. I always geek out on that, but how can we make it easier, and how can we do even less to have a bigger impact? I'm just a big believer in the smallest, most powerful step is the one. And that's how the human mind works better anyway. And when, because scattered attention and multitasking is rubbish, it doesn't work. So yeah, what is the smallest thing you can do? And actually, just, you're right, because we're bringing so much to this, just the listening of this conversation, the intention is it will nourish you, it will shift your perspective. And for me personally, I think one of the biggest things that we can do for other people is make them feel seen and heard. So that is my deepest intention for our collaboration together, is that people feel seen and heard. You're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. We get you.
Yeah, no, I think it will be welcomed. Is it worth us talking about, I mean, I know that the topic of this is essentially maximising effectiveness at work and presence at home, but I guess with the purpose of avoiding what could become burnout, is it worth us just exploring what burnout is and what it might look like?
Yeah, if you want to. Yeah, do you want to start there?
Heidi? So, I mean, from a very sort of technical perspective, I think the World Health Organization recognized it in 2019 as an occupational phenomenon that describes any mental state where workers feel exhausted or disengaged by work. But what could people be looking out for within themselves to realize that maybe they need to take a step back and check in with themselves to see if they're on that path?
That's a great question, because the word burnout, I personally find, is bandied around a lot. I've heard people say, oh yeah, at the end of last year I was burnt out, and now they're doing masses of stuff as if burnout was this, you know, this like little dip and then I overcame it. And that kind of annoys me because as somebody who actually did implode her life through burnout completely unexpectedly, I had absolutely no idea. I was actually head of wellbeing at the time. I knew my stuff. My degree is psychology. I'd studied positive psychology, all this new wellbeing stuff. I was practicing meditation and mindfulness and doing yoga. Like I was prioritizing self-care when I burnt out. It was a complete and utter shock. I believed it. I didn't think it could happen to me. I was coaching others within my profession on how not to burn out. I was doing all of the things, and it was the doing all of the things that I think is the problem. So to me, burnout is really serious. What I actually think is happening when people say I was burnout and now I'm recovering, I'm recovered and I'm fine, is that it's very seductive. So I look back at my time when I was trying to solve the problem of myself, which is that I've created this amazing life. I have this professional respect. I'm earning good money. I'm building, from the outside looking in, my life should be amazing, but something's off. Something's off. I just can't, it's getting harder and harder to hold together. The temporary sacrifice in order to create this professional success is no longer temporary. Like the kid in the back of the car going, are we there yet? It's like, when do I feel successful? When do I get to breathe out and go, yeah, I made it? When was it worth getting my head down and studying when other people were out partying? When do I reap the rewards? And when does it stop just being this never ending cycle of I need to be better at something, I need to give more? And I think that period of my life, I now look back on and say, I was secretly surfing the verge of burnout, and secretly to me. Like, I don't know if other people could see it. People close to me certainly couldn't. I now see it as inevitable because I was squishing myself into a role in an organization that it didn't work for me. And that was a lack of self-awareness and self-knowledge. And I don't say that with judgment. I say that with absolute love and acceptance now. That's part of growing up, growing into the freedom to be myself, getting to know myself better and what works for me. What do I need in order to perform at the high level that I'm driven to perform at? What works for me? So that's part of that discovery. But during that time, I was completely oblivious to the idea that I could burn out. It just didn't make sense. It wasn't on my radar. I was incredibly resilient. I was raising 2 children on my own. I'd survived quite a difficult childhood. I'd done all sorts of incredible things. I'm a high achiever. I'd done a lot of incredible things. It didn't make any sense to me that I would burn out. I was helping other people not burn out. And it's that seductive nature, because what happens is you start reaching these stages of fatigue that you can't recover from. So it starts with, I just need to get through the day. And then instead of having an evening, you start slumping in the evening. And then you think, well, I ought to deal with my stress better. So maybe you put something else in there, like, well, I should be exercising in the evening to get rid of my stress. I should go to bed earlier. I should do this. There's more shoulds piling on top. And you learn to recover because these things all work and they're all good. They just become more. But because you recover, you get back into the fray, and then you do it again. You overwork and ignore all the signs of how you're not valuing yourself. You're not setting things up in a way that supports you in that high performance because you think there isn't another way. I certainly didn't. I was surrounded by people who were incredibly stressed and overwhelmed. And so therefore, it was reflected back to me when I said, but is this it? I don't understand. Why are we doing these things that are pointless, that are leaving us all feeling completely brain fogged when they're unnecessary? So I'm a questioner. I'm not, I'm quite disruptive within an organization because I'll say, but why? This is ineffective. Why would you spend hours and hours making people do these things? But in that process, I would recover, because that's what we do. We recover and we get back in, and then we overwork, and then we do it again and again and again. The problem is that in the end, it's harder to recover. That's what I think starts happening. You start to realize that your weekends are spent recovering to get back into the fray. So everything becomes about, how can I support myself to get through at work without losing my shit? Basically, how do I retain my professional respect? How do I retain this incredibly high productivity? And it's very intellectual, cognitively demanding productivity. So the that overloading of the mind, but there's an adrenaline hit to it as well, because it's like, I did it, I got through, and I you know, and people are really pleased with me, and I did this, and now I'm being promoted. It's there's a seductiveness about it because of that drive, that excitement. I want a full life, I want this and this and this, and that's great, but it's not when you're not supporting yourself, when you don't know what allows you to do that, when you don't realize the toll. So burnout to me is a cycle, and because it's a cycle, that's why it's seductive, because you're constantly getting away with it. It's a real trickster. And for me, when I finally imploded my life through it, that was actually not because I couldn't have forced myself to keep going. I could have forced myself, but I mean, I just wasn't, my heart was like, no. And that's the real, not the real burnout, because there's lots of levels and it's all real and it's all horrible, it's all miserable and unnecessary. But there's a distinct point which I think changes when I noticed for myself, there was this, I suddenly stopped caring. And that's not like me, because I'm a big-hearted, deeply loyal, deeply caring person. And I noticed that I was disengaged. I was suddenly like, I no longer care about the outcomes of this project. I literally don't care. And that was extraordinary. That was actually quite frightening, because I'm just not that kind of person. Everything I do with this huge excitement, energy, intensity. And so to lose that disconnection, that flatness, and it wasn't depression, it was burnout. It was like, it was when I was starting to choose myself, I was starting to see this energy that I'm putting into this other people is costing me too much, and I don't know what to do about it. And I've tried everything. So what it was actually, it was a boundary approaching. I was finding my boundary. I'd overgiven, and I'd gained masses from it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, some of my highlights of my life were in that career. But it was that. I think there is something very distinct when you just go, nah, I don't care anymore. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm disconnecting. I want my life back. Give me my life back. This is not the life I intended to create. I want my life back. I'm not prepared to overgive anymore. And of course, if you're this kind of person who's highly driven and wants to do a really, really good job, that then is when it becomes untenable, because you're lying. There's a lack of integrity. For me, there was a lack of integrity going into a role that I just, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter anymore. I could suddenly see that it didn't matter as much as my health, my world, my sanity. You know, I was sick of, I'd gone from inconvenient tear leakage, which is when, you know, you get that kind of like prickliness here in the nose, and you're like, don't cry now because I need my professional respect. This is inappropriate. This is really irritating. And then it would happen on the drive home. You know, I'd be driving home and realize there were tears. It's like, what's going on? That's really weird. But that inconvenient tear leakage, when it starts to leak into work and mess up what you've set up, that's a problem. But originally it was just coming out at home. So the slightest trigger at home, I would go into this like volcanic emotional eruption of, why is this not being done, and I can't cope, and where's dinner, and whatever, like, because I had my life set up so tightly in order to support myself at work that the slightest crack meant this kind of wailing banshee would come out, and I really didn't like that version of myself. That's not me. I think there's lots of things. I think it starts with, if you're too exhausted to look after yourself properly on a day-to-day basis, and it's starting to build up. So you wake up on a Saturday morning and you were excited to get through and have a Saturday. Hooray, it's not a work day. And you were going to meet friends and do all these things and get organized and, you know, plan nutritious meals for next week and get on top of your life and woohoo. And you wake up and you're like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I feel unwell. I'm not ill. I just feel unwell. I feel heavy. Like my body's like concrete. Why can't I think straight? Where did all that excitement about, thank God I've made it through the week, go? It's that sluggish, something's off at the weekend. Actually, I just want to hide under the duvet. That's, I think, is quite an early sign. And then gradually it becomes that typical, if I can get through today, if I can get through the week, if I can get through to the next holiday, then everything will magically be okay. When that project's finished, when that new hire comes in, when that difficult team member is sorted out, when this, then that, everything is postponed into the future. And there's this exhaustion in that getting through. I think there's those kind of signs. You're not looking after yourself. It's impossible to look after yourself. You don't know what to do. You keep going. You're overriding the signals from your body. There's definitely some signs for you. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
I think one of the other reasons why I thought this was really relevant to discuss was that it has been well documented how general counsels and heads of legals, their roles have expanded, particularly post-COVID, and they're now taking on within organisations that wouldn't have traditionally sat with legal. So, for example, DE&I or ESG, and they're dealing with, I think, an evolving relationship with the teams that they are managing. So that boundary of employer and employee or general counsel and lawyer within the team has changed, I think, also post-COVID. And the demands placed on general counsels and heads of legal, the feedback I'm getting, at least from my discussions with them, is that it has increased and it has thrown them, because they're being asked of themselves things that they never thought they would ever be asked by their team, and therefore that is causing them extra, I want to say burden, but I guess it does feel like they're taking on more emotionally from their team, or more is required of them, which adds to that layer of feeling stretched and taking them potentially on that path of burnout.
Yeah, there are some interesting shifts, aren't there, going on? And I don't think it's just COVID. I think there is in general this shift that work is somewhere that you go to also be looked after. Like your emotional well-being is suddenly your employer's job. It never used to be. It used to be you go in, you do your work, and you're paid for that time. And yes, there's a duty of care. The conditions you work under shouldn't be harming you, and they should be helping you do the best job. But the conditions it never used to be that employers were responsible for your overall health and well-being. Like and that's a really weird one for me. I'm very tired, as you know, of the employer bashing. As an entrepreneur myself, I know how much courage it takes to start a business, to set up, can you imagine being responsible for hundreds of employees? Like it takes courage to do that. And yes, some organizations could do it better. Of course they could. There's always room for improvement, and things change all the time. But does it mean that we're not responsible for ourselves? No. The actual main point of a business is to make money. And if it doesn't make money, the entire society collapses. We need prosperity. We need money. Of course, we don't want to do that in a way, we're not talking about the Industrial Revolution. Of course, we don't want it. So small children are going up chimneys and down mines. We're not talking about that. We're talking about some quite extraordinary expectations now. And the relationship between employer and employee seems to be shifting. And it's just kind of weird and not particularly empowering to either the business, which I hear a lot of business bashing, and I'm just tired of it. And on the other hand, it's disempowering for you as a professional, because ultimately your biggest power lies within you. Knowing who you are, valuing yourself, and knowing your boundaries and your non-negotiables. Deciding that as somebody who is choosing, and let's be clear, this is a choice. We choose. We're very, very fortunate at this point in history that we can choose to go out to work in a place where we're, like huge professional recognition. It's a choice. And when we see it as a choice, we take our power back. If it's very easy, I mean, the mind has a negative cognitive bias. We know this. It's how we've evolved, and that's okay. But without the awareness of that, it's very easy to get into if things were different at work, if my employer was more understanding, if my working conditions were different, then everything would magically be better. And while some of that could be true, it's not the point. The point is how you frame that changes your experience of it. And it is easier and faster to reframe it. It's more powerful. It's more empowering. It takes your power back. It takes a very, very long time to change working conditions. It's very, very fast and effective to change how you view it. So I think the whole, the expectations of teams is an interesting one. So to turn that around, if you're in charge of a team and you feel like you're overgiving and it's draining you emotionally, notice that. Notice that change. You can then choose to be annoyed about it and angry, but once you come through that, what are you going to do about it? And I know the first thing is to notice it, rather than assuming that it's the way it has to be, because not everybody in your position will be doing it the same way as you. And knowing who you are. Now, if you're a person who's, obviously, if you're a lawyer, you have incredible cognitive skills, you're high IQ. To manage a team, you also need high EQ. And often people who are very good at managing teams and care deeply, it's very easy for them to give away their energy. And what I've learned is to notice when you're giving more to a team member than you're giving to a family member or a friend. Is this to look at what's going, not to beat yourself up, not to get onto the self-judgment, but just to notice it. Am I giving more to my team than I am to people I really love? The people who in 10 years' time I'm still going to love when that team member's no longer part of my life. Because if you are, something's off. And then once you notice it, you can adjust. And sometimes it's usually the smallest adjustments. So, for example, noticing, I know a common one, and I know this is something I used to do when listening to a team member, would be, I really, really need to go to the loo, and I've been listening to this person offload on me for about half an hour, and I really just, I had a 10-minute option. I just wanted to go to the loo and make a drink, and I'm still listening to this person, and I like people, so I'm listening to them, and I like the fact that I'm the go-to person to get things sorted, but something's off here. It's the noticing something's off. So what am I going to do about it? And once we start to decide, actually, looking after myself is my number one job, because it is, because if you don't do that, that's what we're talking about. When we're not looking after ourselves, when we don't recognize that actually my job's incredibly demanding, both on my mind and emotionally. So, and that means it's also incredibly demanding on your body. So in order to do this at a high level, I need to change my approach. I need to recognize just how accomplished I am, just how clever and emotionally competent and everything. Look at all the responsibility I've created for myself. Look at this role I've chosen to take on. How can I support myself better? So if you were an athlete, no athlete is successful. Top athletes are only successful because they prioritize the things they need to be successful. And I would argue that the people that you're talking about are like cognitive athletes. It's so demanding. It's such an incredibly demanding job that unless you start recognizing those demands, so if you want to increase effectiveness at work and presence at home, which I would argue is actually exactly the same thing, and they're not in opposition, and you get to have both of them, which is what I love, you need to take seriously the fact that that's the situation you've designed for yourself. That is your world. It is incredibly demanding. If you don't want a job that demanding, there are a million other things. That you are such an incredible person. You could do a lot of other things. But people do tend to want to stay because they want to make it work. How to make it work? Take it seriously. High performance requires incredibly high self-care. I haven't got time for self-care. So that's where we could go next. How do I do this, Heidi? How do I have that high performance? Because I literally don't have time. Is that where you want to go next with that? Or
sorry, I was just like lost in your words. But I guess a takeaway for people on this would be to sort of have an idea of what these non-negotiables small non-negotiables might look like for them. I mean, maybe it's helpful to sort of shed more light on what I'm hearing in my conversations
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
the legal community, which on the face of it just sound like, oh, you know, pretty normal. There's nothing particularly interesting there. But I think in conversations where a lot of this is being said in one conversation, you know, that you're building up a bit of a picture there. But I mean, one thing that is said, apart from feeling stretched because of the increasing role of the general counsel and the demands placed on their team, is this feeling of doing their best, working their hardest, but feeling underappreciated, perhaps not getting the feedback or regular feedback, you know, good and bad, which kind of shows that the business is engaged with what they've been doing in their work. And in fact, sometimes leaving a job to only then get the feedback that they were wonderful and
Very
brilliant,
common,
and that being really frustrating, because the value of having had that while they were in the job psychologically is so important to these individuals. And I think, I mean, it feels like, you know, lack of sleep, you know, not being able to sleep, so getting up early, coming home late, and the basics just missing from their lives. So, you know, knowing how important it is to feed your body and soul with good food, good nutritious food, and just not having time to cook and just grabbing something on the go. And you know, it feels like that there is just so much going on there, that, and it does feel like there are little things that could be done to make really positive changes. I mean, I have a friend who isn't a lawyer, but she's very senior in her profession, and she has had a very difficult time with cancer and has got through that, and so the focus on her is even more on health and well-being. But she does a lot of work on herself in terms of checking in on herself and connecting with herself, and checking that she is okay and taking responsibility for that. And sometimes she will say that she feels that she's feeling less in control of her life, or she's getting more tired. And the reason could be that she has said yes more than no to going to these events, you know, these networking events or these client events. And I say to her, you know, has anything changed in your last couple of weeks? And she said, well, actually, I've just wanted to please, and I really want to make equity. And so I am saying yes to all these opportunities because I think it will help me get there. And in fact, I've taken a step back and realized that half of it is not really going to add any value to my career whatsoever. And so then she blocks time out in her diary now. So she says no to more stuff that she doesn't need to go to, because she knows she doesn't really need to go to it. And she blocks stuff out in her diary for herself, time for herself, if that's a walk, making a cup of tea, preparing a meal for the evening. So kind of owning that about what she can do and what's in her control.
Yeah, I love that as an example. So it's just, I would like to unpick some of that. So the feeling unappreciated and the lack of feedback is a really, really interesting one. So the way I look at it is, you can choose to try and control the universe, which is really hard work. You know, how's that working out for you? So you can be really angry about the fact that you feel underappreciated. And yeah, you're right, but what are you going to do about it? So we're going to pick the easiest thing. And the actual easiest thing is to acknowledge yourself. So of course, it's really helpful. You manage a team, you know how to give good feedback. You do it yourself. So therefore, it's really, really irritating and upsetting when nobody's doing that for you. But nobody's doing it for you, so do it for yourself, because you know the power of it. So do it for yourself first. So acknowledge what you're doing. Just simply state it. I'm holding down an incredibly demanding job. That's an acknowledgement. Acknowledge it, rather than what's the mind doing? I'm hardly coping. I'm just about getting through. Something's wrong. I'm really worried about my health. I'm really worried about my family and my relationships. I'm really worried about this. I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job. There's all of that going on in the mind, right? That's going to do that. Notice that. But is it helpful? No. And it's very, very easy to lose incredible amounts of time, sleep, and energy following the mind's negative patterns. I'm not suggesting you try and stop the mind. That's far too. The easiest thing to do is to notice it. Oh, look, I just lost all of this time going down in a doom loop about how I'm not really coping with my life, how everything's unfair, how I'm under so much pressure. And then once you've noticed it, acknowledge yourself, appreciate yourself. I mean, you can, there's a difference between acknowledgement and appreciation. So play with what's most powerful. You're holding down a really difficult job. You got through that really difficult meeting with that person. You're managing your team really well. Tell yourself what you wish you could hear. Have the conversations that you wish the person above you was having with you. Have them yourself. Feel acknowledged. And then appreciation is actually weaker than acknowledgement. You're doing a really good job. Well done. You got through that. You know, but acknowledgement's the highest form of just acknowledge, this is who I am. I'm doing a really demanding job. I am holding my life together. Despite everything that my mind's telling me is wrong, I'm doing this. So start with, it is possible to change how you feel about things by doing things for yourself. If you want to feel acknowledged, acknowledge yourself. If you want to feel appreciated, appreciate yourself.
Yeah.
So I would start with that, because that is a powerful internal practice that can be done in moments.
And it's in your control.
It's in your control. Internal validation is actually far more powerful than external validation. If you can't, you know, we all do it. We want to please, we don't want to disappoint anyone. We want to know we're doing a good job. And it's really nice when we get it, but it's temporary. It only soothes the anxious mind for a certain amount of time, and then we're back to needing more external validation. It's completely understandable, because the biggest drivers of human behavior are fear and shame, because it's a really ancient system. Because if we got kicked out of the tribe, we would probably die, because people couldn't really survive on their own. So it's a very, very ancient system. It's hitting the amygdala. So it's completely understandable that we seek external validation. But if we're not getting it, what are you going to do about it? Like, you can rail about it and you can be angry about it, but that part of your time and energy that you so desperately need more of it is being wasted by being angry and resentful about that. So quit that, because it's not helpful. Not quit it in a self-judgmental, oh, I'm terrible because I'm allowing myself to get upset. No, of course you're upset. It's okay. Be on your own side. Be your own biggest cheerleader. Stop bashing yourself. But seek internal validation. This is who I am. I like myself. This is what I like about myself. These are my strengths. This is why I was picked for this top job. This is why people love being in my team. This is why, like, literally give yourself internal validation. Know yourself, love yourself, accept yourself. These are deeply transformative practices. You don't do it in one go. You don't go from bashing yourself and not really quite believing you're deserving of this amazing life you've created, so therefore you overwork to kind of justify it, which I do think there is a deep theme for all of us in that. But just in tiny ways, you know, catch the self-judgment, catch it. Oh, I've just wasted however much of the middle of the night in a loop of doom. No wonder I'm not sleeping properly. I would argue that there's a lot of energy and time to be recouped from attention, basic attention practices, which we can call mindfulness. But the problem with mindfulness is it's been sold as a stress management strategy, which is not. I feel it's grossly misused, like the term well-being, which drives me mad. People don't want yoga. They want to feel sane. They want some control over their working conditions. They don't want added stuff in. Mindfulness is a very, very ancient practice. But when you remove the self-compassion from it, which is what tends to happen when it's misused as a stress management tool, it's actually horrible. So when I was practicing mindfulness as a stress management technique years ago, when I was in a very demanding career, I would notice just how miserable I was. It was completely unhelpful. But mindfulness with self-compassion, which is what true Buddhist mindfulness is incredibly powerful, because you are seeing and acknowledging yourself in this moment. I see that you are suffering and I love you. Being able to, it sounds fluffy, but it's not. It's incredibly powerful, because what we are all actually seeking is this love. We want to feel loved and appreciated by those around us. Now, it sounds fluffy, like self-kindness sounds fluffy. You can dismiss it as fluffy, but it will be one of the most powerful things you do, is to internally validate what an incredible person you are and what an incredible job you're doing under incredibly difficult situations. And to bring back your attention to yourself. So one of the problems, the reason that we're not as effective at work as we could be, and not as present at home, so if we go back to the how do we maximize effectiveness at work and presence at home, because it's all the same thing. It's about having a strong mind. It's about controlling your attention. It's about being able to focus on what matters most to you. What are the things at work which will actually create the best outcome, and being able to discern. Because what we actually end up doing is, when we get fatigued and overwhelmed, we go into repetitively checking emails, repetitively doing the lower level tasks, which are not the high performing tasks that are required of us. And it's easy to get lost in that when our attention is scattered. Our attention is on stuff we're worried about at home, on stuff we're worried about our health, on self-judgment, on stuff we're worried about there's a lot to think about, right? When your attention is scattered through time and space, it's very, very difficult to focus. Learning to bring your attention back to yourself, into your body, knowing who you are, and from there, knowing what matters to you. Starting to get to know yourself better. What are my values? What are my non-negotiables? Where are my boundaries? How do I take care of myself at this season in my life? Because it changes all the time. How do I do that? That's an attention practice, and it's very powerful. Bring your attention back to yourself. Notice completely neutrally what's going on for you. Then we can shift from, I have too much to do, my life's really difficult, to, there's nothing wrong with me. And this is very important, because I believe there is nothing wrong with you. You are not a self-improvement project. You can dump that secret, invisible, get better at list, which is adding to your overwhelm, adding to your exhaustion, constantly draining you. And I've forgotten what I was going to say next. I love it when that happens. It'll come back. Bring your attention back to yourself. Get to know yourself. Know what works for you. That's it. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong, full stop. So if you start viewing all of the problems that you're talking about as just useful information, useful course corrections, the overwhelm, the exhaustion, the signs of burnout, the irritation, the resentment, the volcanic eruptions at home, the lack of sleep, the lack of looking after, it's all just useful information. When you separate yourself from it in that way, what I call neutral noticing, noticing what's going on, so catching it rather than dismissing it, rather than being lost in it, then notice it neutrally. Notice all the self-judgments and judgments of others and judgments of the employer and judgments of the world and anger with everything. Like, when you catch that and notice it, you say, okay, this is the feedback. This is the life I've created. This is the life I intended to create. Where's the gap, and what can I do about it? Well, the stuff that's making you tired and draining is where you can get your energy back, because you don't just want more time. Time isn't the issue. We all gone about, I don't have time. You have plenty of time. I can expand time for you. Literally, think about time. Time is not linear. If you've got a project and you've got no time, time goes really fast. But when there's other, when you've missed a train, time goes really slow. Like, time, our experience of time changes with our assumptions and our beliefs and how much stress we're under and all sorts of things. You have the time to take care of yourself. I promise you I could find it for you. What you actually want is your attention back.
Yeah.
Because when you pull your attention back to you, you can reclaim, you can see what's going on. Oh, the reason I'm tired is I over listened to somebody. I let them pour out all of their stuff onto me for an hour, when actually that hour could have been used more effectively. And that happens all the time, and it happens with the best will in the world. And it's a bit like you were talking about the friend of yours about saying yes, and knowing what to say yes to and knowing what to say no to. We're not going to get it right all the time, but notice, take everything as feedback.
Yeah.
What's working for you, what's not working for you. There's nothing wrong, it's just feedback, and you can use it to course correct. And the how to maximize effectiveness at work and presence at home is it's an attention control thing. It's about having a strong mind. It's about saying, I need my mind to be sharp. I need my mind. I need to be able to think straight. I need to be able to exercise discernment in where I place my attention, because being overwhelmed is costing me. So deal with the overwhelm first. Prioritize nourishing and looking after your mind. So what I would do for that is notice what's draining you, notice when you're overwhelmed, and instead of pushing through the overwhelm, which is what everybody's doing, of course you're overwhelmed. If you want that, if you want a life, if you want such a demanding life, of course you're going to be overwhelmed and exhausted. How many times have you had that fed back to you? How many times are you saying that to yourself? And I'm here to say it's time to gently rebel against that nonsense, because it's not true. It feels true, but it's not true. That is the trick of overwhelm. And the mind gets overwhelmed so easily because it's designed to be overwhelmed easily to keep you safe. And the biggest thing that overwhelms your mind, so that fog, I can't see straight, I've just said yes to things. So when we say yes to things that aren't nourishing for us, it's usually because we're not pausing and responding, we're reacting. If you're in reactive mode, you're in flight, fight, freeze. You're in survival mode. If you're when this, then that, so your future happiness when you can chill out is in the future, you're in survival mode. If you're overwhelmed, you're in survival mode. If you're ever at a stage where you think you're faced with only two equally rubbish options, that's overwhelm. It's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. It's all overwhelm. Overwhelm is brushed off as nothing, and yet it is what prevents you being highly, and I mean really highly, effective at work without all the rubbish and the overwhelm and the exhaustion and the I have no time to look after myself. Pure effectiveness, much higher performance and presence at home. Deal with the overwhelm first. Learn what overloads your mind, what stresses you. Notice the fear, because fear is what drives us. If I don't get this done, people will think badly of me. If I don't do this, I'll let somebody down. And we are driven by this fear unknowingly, and then we let ourselves down, and then we wonder why we're struggling. So you want to be even more effective at work and get your life back and be present and be able to hear your partner think? Deal with the overwhelm. Sounds tiny, it sounds fluffy. Learn to nourish your mind. Learn to value yourself. Change how you think about things. I'm not suggesting to nourish your mind and get rid of overwhelm. You get up at 5 a.m., sit on a cushion and meditate for an hour. I'm talking about tiny moments in between. So I have this practice called white stripes, where, when you look at your calendar and it looks like there's no space. Because for some reason in this country and in every country in the world, we run meetings on the hour till the hour. Why? Why do meetings not run from 5 past to 5 to? They should do. They should be a lot shorter. But anyway, you look at your calendar and there's no space, and you're telling yourself, I have no time for myself, therefore I can't cook nourishing meals, and I can't do this and I can't do that, and I'm stuck. Well, how's that working out for you? It's not. So change your perspective. I do have time, I just can't see it because I'm overwhelmed. Overwhelm's a fog. Then look at your calendar again, and deliberately, because your mind is looking for the blacked out bits, it's saying, oh, I'm complete, I've got no space. Your mind is always looking for the negative, just the way it's built. That's fine. You need to retrain it. Look for the moments in between, which are the white stripes, the empty bits. They might not even physically exist. You're still going to imagine them in. So, for example, let's just take the worst case scenario. You're completely booked out for 24 hours, 12 hours. You have this stupid day of meeting after meeting, like a whole day of board meetings, or whatever. There's no time. Your mind's telling you there's no time, there's no time. And then you're in panic mode straight away, overwhelmed, fear, activated system. That's no place to be. There is time. You are going to go to the toilet. We're going for real desperate looking for time, but we are going to find it. Your job is to find the moments in between and reset your nervous system. It's the biggest thing you can do. So and you need to link it to things you do anyway. So for example, when you get up in the morning, you have a shower. When you're having a shower, where's your attention? Bring your attention back to yourself. Feel the water on your head. Be present. And a really nice thing to do with the shower is to, as the water goes down, imagine that all the stresses are going down the plug hole. Just let them go. Let them go. What do you do next? You dry your hair. Well, infuse your hairdryer with some sort of magical boundary thing. Imagine that as you dry your hair, and there's like a shield going over you with this beautiful boundary. You're setting yourself up to take better care of yourself. Your energy is not leaking out. Other people's draining energy is not. Don't absorb it. Set your boundary. Use your hairdryer. Or use your clothes. Anything. Imagine that you have a boundary. Just try it on for fun. Just give it a go. Use the tiny things that you do anyway. Every time you drink a glass of water or a drink. So you're going to drink. Even on a day when you've got board meetings, you're going to have to drink and eat and go to the toilet. They're basic things. You're definitely going to do those. They're your moments in between on your worst case scenario days. No time at all. Drink of water. Imagine that water is infused with ease. And as you drink it, imagine and feel ease going down through your body, or peace, or love, or self-acknowledgement, however you want to feel calm, strong, confident, professional. Infuse your drinks with it. Drink it in. Tiny, tiny things. Shift how you're looking at it. Get playful. Allow yourself to be creative in those moments in between. There is always time. Do not tell me that every meeting you go to is so exciting that you're completely riveted by it and you couldn't just step back and pretend you're listening and do a quick, I can feel my feet on the ground, I'm resetting my nervous system, I'm allowing myself, you can practice being the person you want to be, which is somebody who is more calm, who looks after herself or himself really well. Imagine that you're already doing it. Don't add stuff to your to-do list. Change how you're moving through your day. Bring your attention back to yourself. Stop giving your energy away by noticing, where am I giving my energy away? It's precious. It belongs to you. Bring it back. You matter. How you are in the world matters. How you are impacts everybody. When we change how we are by being the strong, capable people we are, by controlling our attention, bringing our energy and focus back to us, that ripples out because people respond to us differently. When you slightly have a shift you notice it, don't you? Like some days you're rocking the world and you walk differently.
Yeah.
Shoulders back, like that changes how you are. I remember listening to a story about, I think it was an autobiography, no, not autobiography, a biography of Marilyn Monroe. And she was walking with a friend, and the story goes that they were walking through a really busy place and nobody recognized her. And then she said, and now watch. And she turned into Marilyn Monroe and she just changed how she walked. And now everybody flocked to her. If you can use that story, I am calm, competent, and professional. I value myself. I have excellent boundaries. I know my non-negotiables. I validate myself. I love myself and I take really good care of myself. Walk around like that and see how your life changes. It's easier, it's faster. Don't add a ton of stuff to your do list. Value yourself.
That's really, really helpful. And I'm sure people will really take that on board and hopefully put it into practice, because actually when you say it, you've got a lovely way about you of it being very calm, but also very simple things that people can do. And I think it also makes sense that if you're able as a general counsel or head of legal to connect with yourself and understand how you're feeling and thinking and proactively, without judgment, look after yourself better, then you're going to be a more effective leader, because you'll be able, if you can't connect with yourself, then you're not going to be able to connect with your team as well, are you? And therefore all that comes with that, strong leaders, high EQ, the best general counsels are the ones that have the highest emotional intelligence. And to do that, they're very often self-aware of themselves and of their team. So just bringing it back to, from a commercial perspective, from a making sure that you are being as effective as possible at work, it is so important to sort of practice those put those non-negotiables into place. And I love the boundaries with the water coming down in the shower. That's
very powerful, because it becomes habit. You're going to have it. Use the things you're doing anyway.
Yeah.
Don't add anything in. Like, you have enough to do.
Yeah.
Use the things you're doing all the time. Change how you're doing them.
So how do people find you, Heidi, if they want to learn more about your sort of teachings and wisdom?
Oh, thank you. Well, I have a website, a lovely newly branded website, which I'm very excited about, just at heidimarke.co.uk. I have a newsletter that comes out every Sunday. Whatever you do, don't add this to your must-read list, just absorb its nourishment. It's called A Gently Rebellious Read, which is looking at this stuff in depth each week. I have a podcast, which is currently on a break, but we're about to go into season 2, which is very, very exciting, called Overwhelm is Optional. There's lots of people I've interviewed on there about this kind of stuff, and it's always good, I think, to hear other people's stories. And I've also taught a lot on there and shared my own stories. I have a book, Overwhelm is Optional, which is available on Amazon, and you can reach out to me on LinkedIn very easily. I post often on there. Nice, nourishing things to lift your day and make you look at things differently.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And it's been great speaking with you.
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn.